The Blue Line Voice. Blood, sand, and smoke.
And welcome to the Blue Line Voice, Blood, Sand, and Smoke podcast. Today we have a special guest. He is a retired firefighter of 38 years, retired in July of 2012, holds an associate's degree in fire service administration from the University of Cincinnati. He was a hazardous material coordinator, senior coordinator out of the state of Wisconsin. He is the CEO of Docimo and Associates, LLC. He's a peer mentor at Saving a Life and Reverse, advocating for first responder mental health. He was a Connecticut Instructor of the Year, National Instructor of the Year. He was the first In the Zone Award Hot Zone Conference in 2001. He also is a FEMA National Fire Academy subject matter expert on emergency response to terrorism. Without further ado, I want to introduce Frank Docimo. Frank, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. It's an honor.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. It's easy when the mission is, both our missions is to help correct this problem.
Right. It is. It is. And you've been doing some very notable work, and we're going to get in that and progress into that. But first, let's know about Frank. Like, I believe you told me it was at 1973 or 78.
1973 is when I became a volunteer firefighter.
Yeah. So let's start at that point. Let's go a little bit backwards. Like, where did you grow up, and what got you into the volunteer service?
Well, I was born in Norwalk, Connecticut. My dad was in the Korean War at that time, and actually got married on a weekend pass. But after that, I spent my entire life in Stamford, Connecticut. And my dad owned two service stations, one in Stamford, one in Greenwich. So most volunteers join at 16 back then. You were able to join as a junior member. I didn't want anything to do. I had nothing to do with a fire service. All my cousins and uncles were cops, and I knew that wasn't for me. So on Saturdays, when I became a little older, 17, my dad would go home, take my mom out, and I'd close the station. I'll never forget this. We had put a carburetor on a 1968 Pontiac Bonneville station wagon. You know, the ones that are a boat. The guy drove it up the road. He walked back and said, "It's on fire." I went up there with our wrecker. I dumped two 20-pound dry chem extinguishers in it, got the hell beat out of me. It burned to the ground. And of course, the folks that showed up, because my dad had that business, I knew a lot of them. So I took a beating, and they said, "Oh, you ought to join. I said, I don't know. So that's kind of my introduction, is getting beat up in the smoke trying to save a customer's car. A couple months later, they were doing some work on a rig. And like I said, I was a mechanic, and they needed a special puller. And they always know I work late. So they called up. They said, "Hey, you got a puller for this?" I said, "Yeah, I do." I said, "Let me bring the kit down. I'll help you guys out." So I went down there. We pulled the shaft out of one of the manual transmissions, got it put back together 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And I said, "Hey, this is pretty cool, free water, free soda, free coffee." And within 6 months of that, I joined the volunteer service.
And what was the name of that fire department that you had joined?
It's actually called Turn of the River Fire Department. When they built the Merritt Parkway in Connecticut, which was coming out of New York City, the Greenwich, New York line, was built in the 28 to 30 during the Depression. That stretch of highway is about 30-something miles long till you get to Stratford, where the river is. Every one of the bridges built there are different. It was an architectural contest to make one bridge look different than the other. So that road was designed to go 30 miles an hour. The original toll booth was made out of Lincoln logs, for better, analogy. When they took the tolls off, they took that toll station away. It's actually in the Henry Ford Museum. And the guy, you would pay whatever it was, and the guy would push down on the log. You go through, and it dropped down for the next one. So that piece of it kind of played an important role in some of my experiences. Again, the road was never ever designed for the amount of traffic. There's no breakdown lanes, none. They don't exist. The center is trees, and I'm not talking ferns. I'm talking like oaks. So that was kind of one of the things that, looking back, had affected me. I worked some horrific wrecks up there. Horrific.
And that was on the old roadway. Am I correct?
The road has never been changed because it's listed in the historical.
Wow. Okay.
So they changed the entrance and exit ramps. They had to, because they were literally, make a U-turn. So they did a lot of that, but it's never been widened. The bridges have never been stretched out yet. The traffic is probably 10, 20, 30 fold what they thought it would be, almost 100 years now, right? 28, we're getting close.
So 73, you join
Yes.
as a volunteer, and you start progressing. You eventually go paid. Am I correct?
Yeah. Within 5 months, I happened to join just, I would say, 3 or 4 months before the election. That's a big thing in volunteer fire service. And I wasn't there 6 months, and they elected me as a assistant engineer, fix the trucks kind of a deal. Well, in my career, up until I became paid, I held every office in that organization except for chief. So I held training officer, I held lieutenant's position, captain's position, safety officer position. And when I became paid in 1978, that district was expanding. Stamford proper downtown is right off I-95 corridor, but we were up in the boonies. And now, I remember talking about turn of the river. When they built the Merritt Parkway, they literally turned the Rippewam River, Rippewam Indians. And that's where the station was built. It was on the piece of land that became available when they turned the river. So it was from downtown Stamford to going up to North Stamford, it's like going to Vermont. I mean, really, I could remember 2-lane highways. So as the demand grew in that part of the community, they were hiring more and more paid guys. When I started as a volunteer, there was 8. We had 2 stations. They covered the day shifts. Pretty typical in a volunteer organization. At night when they're home, you get the volunteers. So they put paid guys on during the day to fill that gap. So I was hired as number 7 and number 8, the fellow after me. And we were able to go 24 hours then because we had 2 stations were able to do it. But in those days, for most of that career, I worked alone.
So you'd be at the station, and you'd get dispatched for a call.
Yeah, our responsibility was.
How would that? So in 1978, how would that work?
Well, that's really kind of funny now. Like I said, my dad had the area that the fire station was in. My dad's gas station was 3/4 of a mile away. So the volunteer organization, what they actually gained was another driver, because I was right up the road. And I'm sorry, just give me the question again.
And so in 1978, when you said you'd be the only person on duty.
Yes.
So how did that go?
Yep.
As far as manpower and everything.
They would tone everything out. Our job was to get the first due rig on scene. Now, we had fire phones in the station just before 911. We used to be able to pick up. So we'd listen in on the call. Well, I can remember a couple of times I hear one and I say, all right, listen, that house, you got to go over the Merritt Parkway Bridge. It's the first house on the right, and the house that's calling is way in the back. Because it was a customer like Dad's, But back then we were doing 100 calls a year. When I came on the job paid, we went to 300. When the city took us over, that station I spent most of my career in was doing 3,000. Now, we did add some paid guys, so we went basically one guy on duty, both stations, get the truck there and hope volunteers show up. Two, we had a fire marshal, full-time engineer, and we went to a firefighter on each rig. So it gave us capability to basically deal with the increased calls. But that part of town, even back then, the homes were $1 million. Jackie Robinson was a customer of my dad's. Meatloaf was a customer of my dad's, because at a good day, you can get from North Stamford to Manhattan in about 35 minutes. So they used to be out there, and they all had chauffeurs. I mean, that's the kind of clientele that my dad was dealing with. Pretty cool place to grow up.
So when it was just you as the engineer and you're at the station, you get dispatched for a call. Was there ever a time that you showed up to a scene where you were the only one, where perhaps there was a structure fire and you're like, I have no help, but I got to get this fire out?
Yeah. Some of those stories are just embedded. On Saturday night, there used to be a racetrack up at Danbury, and that's where all the guys would go. And there's a couple of Stanford guys that actually used to race right down the road from my dad's station. So it was another station, but we knew that, but it was pretty friendly back then. I get a fire on the third floor of a house probably built in the 20s. I pull up, there's smoke showing. I don't even want to guess the age of the couple, but I can tell you right now, they were retired. So I stretched the line to the front door, knowing I'm not going to be able to get it out. I just know that. So I yelled to the guy, the owner of the house. I said, I'll put this fire out, but you got to grab that hose, you and your wife, and keep pushing it until I say stop. So they were feeding me the line while I'm trying to put the fire out, Did it happen often? No. But it's, that was one of those ones you used to look back and say, okay, I need a little bit of help. You look this way, there's nobody. You look that way, there's nobody. So what do? You go to work. You do what you got to do.
As you progressed, so 78 and then into the 80s, things started to evolve in the fire service, where their manpower was there. And
yes. And I'll tell you what changed in the 80s. If I was smart enough, I'd really like to write a book like The Greatest Generation, because, they talk about World War I, World War II vets. The bottom line is the 80s was the greatest generation for firefighters. Absolutely. We did simple things. What do you mean simple things? We actually put doors on the back of the fire trucks. We actually put roofs on fire trucks.
Yeah.
We went from come-alongs and auto body repair tools to the hearse tool. We went from, talk about small and how things evolve. We had 8 paid guys. We only had 6 breathing apparatus, because the mentality was, well, the drivers shouldn't go in. Well, there's only 2 of you. That's kind of not quite true, So I became, in Connecticut, I was the first person to be certified at Hearst at the factory. And that goes back to the Merritt Parkway. Just like I said, horrific crashes. Turner River was very acceptable, or what do I want to say? I had chiefs that listened. And what does that mean? I said, Chief, we need a Hearst tool. And when Hearst actually changed and they went to a small cutter and a small spreader, we had serial number 5 and serial number 6. The first 4 went to the distributors, and we were doing things by fax, trying to figure out how to hook this stuff up. So that piece drove. I actually, my first training, recognizable training, was I went to the Connecticut Fire School, and they were doing hands, basic 16-hour car rescue. And I wrote the hydraulics and I wrote the airbag program because we had the need. We had the stuff. Nobody else had the stuff. We were called one time. At that time, I worked for a chief, Chief Reed. Chief Reed told me, he said, he was down in Westchester County, and we just put a brand new Mack rescue truck in. Nobody had Macks. This is a 16-foot, onboard everything, big generator, all that. So he said, I was down in Westchester County, and they said, hey, we heard about this rig, and we want to come up and see it. So the chief said, well, I'm going to figure out a weekend when Frankie's working. He knows that. I was on the committee to develop that rig. So they came up and said, hey, I want you, one of the chiefs said, hey, I want you to know if we need you, we're going to call you. I said, okay. Chief Reed said to me, did you hear that? I said, yes, sir. He goes, okay. He said, your job is to get in the truck and go. My job is to figure everything else out. And he was a guy that was just a chief's chief. When I was given the National Training Award at FDI, they used to do that on a Sunday morning. It was presentation of colors, salute the flag, and the George Post Award. My chief, he knew, I didn't know. He drove from Connecticut to Cincinnati that Saturday and met me on stage when I was given the award. Gave me the award. I spotted him going, oh, what? Well, then my name was announced, So I went up, thanked him, blah, blah, blah. And then he said, come on, we'll go to breakfast. Went to breakfast. He says, okay. I said, have a good conference. I'll see you when you get back, and drove back home. That's the kind of chief that I really love working for. He was just a great guy. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Frank.
And then, once we got the capability on that rescue, we ended up buying 4 level A suits. We bought some extended breathing apparatus. We bought chlorine kits because we had the water treatment facility in the district. And, I basically knew, one of those guys, I think I got a pretty good pulse of what's going on, and I said, Hazmat's coming. And we started moving that rig. We had a 300-pound dry chem extinguishing system built inside the rig. So we were able to put chemical fires out. It had 300 pounds of dry chem and 100 gallons of AFFF. So we were forward thinking on that. And that's when we had the emergency in Stamford that we burned the 4 firefighters at a chemical plant. Prior to that, within 3 months before that, I approached because they were districts. There were 6 different chiefs, 5 volunteer in the districts and then fully paid downtown. I met with them in October, I want to say 88 or 89 maybe. And I said, hey, Hazmat's coming. I'm telling you. I said, I'm going to tell you what, Turner River's giving me the okay to move forward. I'd much rather you all join me than me hang out there alone, saying, think about it with budgets coming up, all that kind of stuff. And then try to get 6 chiefs on the same page, all that. In January, we had a fire downtown, United Organics, burned 4 firefighters. 1 firefighter drove a car to my wedding party. The other firefighter grew up 3 streets away. We played hockey together. We played baseball together. And, when you get older, you think this, but you never say it out loud, which was, I told you guys so. I told you, you wouldn't listen. And that started me saying, somebody's got to know how to do this better. And that's kind of pushed me into the hazmat arena.
Yeah. Which leads me into the somewhat the next question. You were the Connecticut Instructor of the Year and National Instructor of the Year, both in 92 and 98. FEMA and the National Fire Academy brought you in to help develop the national curriculum for emergency response to terrorism. But I believe also your mindset with hazmat was part of that, helped that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. What actually happened there, a good friend, Chris Hawley, Baltimore County, he was in charge of the hazmat program in Baltimore County. And me and Chris were good friends. And both of us, our forte is instrumentation. And Chris had a good background on it. I had a really good background on it. And when the Fire Academy were looking for somebody to write this program, the arena basically said, you need to get a hold of Frank Docimo and Chris Hawley. Those guys will do a great job for you. What was really cool is at that time in the National Fire Academy, they didn't have anybody to oversee us. They were going through some changes in budget. So we basically had free reign, which was very unusual. There's a lot of programs that I worked with and worked on that we can't say this, we're going to bump this. They just basically left us alone and said, get this thing out. And it really was, because both of us were good hazmat guys moving into this new arena of chemical emergencies, dealing with terroristic events.
I think sometimes hazmat is, it doesn't come up on the priority list a lot, right? when we think of the fire service, we think of fires, or we think of vehicle extrications or building rescues or whatnot. But hazmat, one, it's dangerous, right? And two, you need to be specifically trained in hazmat, where a lot of your big fire departments and agencies throughout the country actually have dedicated hazmat divisions. Am I correct?
Yeah. If you're in according to OSHA, any fire department, I don't care if you're paid or volunteer, there's 5 levels of training in under OSHA for hazmat: awareness, operational technician, specialist, and incident commander. As an example, the cop will be trained to the awareness level. Usually a 4-hour program, show them what a diamond is. Remember, my cousin and uncles are cops, so I used to tell them there's 3 things you guys can do at a chemical emergency, and that's handcuff it, shoot it, or read it its rights. Other than that, you better call a fire guy, So that was simply recognize. Operational, according to OSHA, says if you're a fire department and the bay door opens, you're operational. Now, originally, that was the 4 Ds: damage, dike, defensive, and basic decon. That's where most fire departments should be. So it's still a defensive tactic. When you get to offensive, that's where the technicians are. And that's why I spent most of my career training. Technician level hazmat teams after 9/11, Pentagon Protection Force, CIA, National Security Agency, because one of the things I developed was a system that works. And there's a lot of fire departments use my system. So that coupled with the hazmat background basically led me to where I was. Instrumentation. I was taking a class. They made me take a class up in Massachusetts on taking samples. I said, you guys do know that I was like one of the reviewers of this program. When they moved to the city of Stamford, hazmat went down. I go, you don't have this. I said, I helped develop it. No, you got to go. Okay. So I go to Massachusetts. I'm parked behind the van. 5 of the 6 people that get out of the van to teach have been students of mine. So I get out. They look at me. I look at them. And I'll never forget it. The hazmat coordinator from Buffalo, New York, looks at me. He goes, you're not going to be an asshole, are you? I said, you're not going to tell me anything that's not true, are you? He goes, it's going to be a long 3 days, So we go in the class, and like most FEMA classes, NFA, everybody introduce themselves. Where are you from? How long you been in the service? What do you want from this program? Well, freaking Fitzpatrick passes me over. Okay, I'm checking my head. Shots fired. He takes out this ratty old binder, wire bound, and he's flipping, and he finds it, and he hands it to a kid in the front row. He goes, read that for me. The kid goes, 203-722-0791. And then Fitzpatrick goes, whose phone number is that? I raised my hand. He goes to the kid, now read what it says next to it. Hazmat meter expert. That's the kind of calls I would get. We're at a building. The numbers don't make sense. Why are we seeing these hits on a colorimetric tube? Why is it driving us down this arena? So that, and when we did a lot of work for the 3-letter agencies, both my wife teaches radiation, they have our numbers. And we get called, I wouldn't say frequently, but frequently enough where they say, because they can't tell me. So it's, well, if they were going to use this chemical, what meter would work? I said, all right, give me a couple hours. I'll lay all this stuff out for you. So that's a really neat place to be when the troops know that there's, when I work with the infrared stuff, we used to call it reach back. Boy, that's a great word. I love that. I can't, the troops in the street can't get it, may not be able to put the puzzle together, but I got a guy. I got a guy who can help us through that. And we did a lot of that.
Yeah. So obviously being a firefighter, you see things that you don't want to see, right? And we can talk about some of it, what you're comfortable talking about. But in 38 years, you saw a lot of shit.
Absolutely.
You saw probably your fair share of fatal accidents. You probably saw, obviously, fair share of fires, building collapses, and what have you. How did that affect you as it progressed? Like, that was your job. That was your day-to-day job. And you're going through it, and you're not really probably thinking about it at the time, but as time progressed, how did that affect you?
Well, I can remember one of the first bad calls. It was during the gas shortage of the 70s. And up on the Merritt, we pulled up, car on fire, and there was a guy in it, obviously dead, obviously dead. Well, I can remember the volunteer chief back then. We went back, got everything back in order. He said to the whoever was on the crew, "Come on in the office." And the way to deal with that was take a shot of whiskey. And even back then, that didn't compute. I'm going, this kind of a little goofy, but So you go along. Then you hear all the rumors. Suck it up, kid. I was told one time this job isn't just dumpster fires, people die. Okay. So I had a couple little, I want to say, visions. One was going to a multiple alarm fire. We could see it when we left the station. In my head, I'm thinking to tell the driver, slow down, let me think this out. And then instantaneously, I'm going, the best chance of this fire going out or somebody's life being saved is us showing up and doing our job. So that helped me along. It's like, when you deal with their lives, but you get to a point where you say, I can't save them all, but you have to be, I call it the A team. You come to work, people expect you to be the best that you can be. So that had an effect, but it delayed. I would say that delayed some of my issues because I'm doing the best I can. I'm doing the best I can. And then
So-
go ahead.
Back then, it was more of I should say back then, it's still going on now today. It was more of the suck it up and go on to the next call.
Yeah. When I hear that, I said the next call is going to be when you hear somebody committed suicide. I read a great quote on that. Suck it up. It says, suck it up simply means you're going to delay the issue. That's all it's going to happen. It's not going to go away. By sucking it up, it's not going to go away. You just temporarily pushed it ahead, kicking the ball down the road kind of thing.
How that sucking it up type of mentality, how did that shape you? You had to carry that silence.
Yeah, I think what happens is you become numb. You just become numb. You get to places, I've had, I told you earlier in some of our discussions, I had that car wreck on the Parkway, mother and daughter killed, worked our butts off, and I was covered in blood. And at that point, I think that was one of the straws that broke the camel's back. I took my gear off, told my buddy Louie, driver of the engine, I said, Louie, I'm going to walk back to the firehouse, just take my gear, and I just need a few hours to get this under control in my own head. And I did. I dropped my gear. I got back to the station. I called. I said, send another officer up here. I got to have a little bit of time to. So we had a really, really bad call. Back then it was okay. Go home for the shift. That was the answer. There was no support. The support was you handle it yourself. And that became more and more. My mental health issues are accumulative, and I look back and go, man, I worked through a lot of shit. There was a collapse in Bridgeport, Connecticut, LaBiance. I was a fire marshal at that time. We had to be certified. We had to do, I think, 60 credits a year, whatever. So they used to sponsor a big training in New Haven, 3 days. So you can grab 24 hours of research training in 3 days. So we're in New Haven, which is just on the other side of Bridgeport. And all of a sudden, you're in a room with 600 and 150 pagers are going off. Okay. So they said, all right, we got to put a hold on. Something's going on, blah, blah, blah. 20, 30 minutes later, all right, listen, there's been a major collapse in Bridgeport. If you're heading home, do not take 95. You're not going to get there. And he said, we'll figure this out. Well, I wasn't even home from the fire marshal's class. And the person in charge, Jonathan Best, dear friend, called my cell, my personal. I said, Jonathan, what's going on? He goes, listen, we got about 30 people trapped in a 9-story building construction on a jack construction. They had failure and it pancaked. He said, my problem, it's March, April. I think it was March. Anyways, it was cold. Because I got steel workers want to get in there and cut steel away to save their buddies. He said, the problem is I don't know if I got oxygen tanks, settling tanks, propane for heat. He goes, all these guys want to go to work and we don't have any monitoring. I said, okay, no problem. Back in my head, Chief Reed saying in my whispering, If they need it, go. If they need it, go. Jonathan says, I could call 10 fire departments and not get the instruments you have on one rig. I said, all right, I'm going to turn around. I'll meet you in the command post. I called down, said the headquarters, I send the rescue up. They want our rescue up there now. And I called Chief Reed. I said, Chief, it looks like we're going to be here a while. And a while might be, we might be 2 or 3 days up here. Okay, no problem. No problem. He said, remember, my job is to take care of that, and your job is to take care of where you're at. Okay. So we went up there. We worked 41 hours up there, monitoring holes. And Jonathan Best, my buddy, said to the iron workers, if any of Frankie's guys said stop, you stop. If you don't stop, I'm pushing all of you off the site. It's that simple. So we deployed like 6 different detectors, and we'd say, okay, you could cut here. You can't cut here. They flew a guy in from California with the fiber optic camera. This is cutting edge technology. I worked with that guy. My job was to make sure that guy was safe. And he'd go down, oh, look, he said, we see a sneaker. He'd go a little bit more, oh, look, there's a Coke can, a little bit more, oh, yeah, there's the body, And I don't even know how many we found because it was just repetitive, just repetitive. That, I relate that incident, which kind of pushed me over the edge. That's where I had basically seen enough.
So basically, that was when you realized something's wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Walk us through that.
Shortly after that, you become, I think, anger. Anger is one of the things. You get mad. You just get mad. You become a secluse. You lock yourself in and say, all right, I'll figure this out. And, I'll figure this out. And you never really can. After that call, I actually had chest pains. And I don't remember that year. I don't, but it's early 2000 where I had chest pains. And I went in, they did some cardiac stuff and didn't find anything. Okay. All right. So that's where we're at. That's where we're at. Several years later, when the city had taken us over, we had moved out of Turner River. I was down in the Hazmat station downtown. They had run a bunch of calls that day. It was a Saturday. I could say it was Saturday, October 1st, 2011. 2:00 in the morning, I'm knocking at the captain's door saying, hey, Cap, I got chest pains. I need to go to the hospital. That simple. And what I was going to tried to do, firefighter mentality. I'll work the shift. If I still have chest pains in the morning, I'll drop myself to the hospital. So 2:00, I said, call the bus, get an ambulance. The guy in the back was a guy that I've known 35 years. We used to ride motorcycles together. He's got a 12 lead on him. I say to him just like this. I said, I don't care what you're going to tell me, okay, Steve, but you got 12 leads on me. Am I having a heart attack or not? He goes, I don't think so. Okay. So I end up going to hospital. That was a Saturday. They don't do nothing but strap a bunch of monitors on you, take blood every other hour. And Monday they said, all right, listen, we're going to get you scheduled for the CAP lab. I go, what's wrong with me? They go, we had chest pains. I said, from what? So 5 days in the cardiac floor, every test you can imagine, I passed. No issue. Stress test, dye test, echo, all that. So Thursday afternoon, the floor doc, the floor cardiologist, the firehouse doctor, and a couple of cardiologists, they're all in saying, well, Mr. Docimo, we got good news. Your heart's okay. You can go back to work. I said, let's talk about this. He said, what do you mean? I said, 5 of you tell me what I didn't have. Somebody please tell me what I did. Well, the cardiologists are staying in their lane. It's not your heart. I said, I didn't ask you that. I asked you, what is it? He said, well, I said, okay, no problem. I said, we have unlimited sick. And so somebody tells me what is wrong with me. I'm not going back. I don't care. So that was October 2011, first week. They sent me to wellness. You got to eat more Brussels sprouts and all that stuff. You can imagine a firefighter or a cop going, you really need to change your diet, Okay, yeah. All right, whatever. I'll eat a little salad before I eat the steak, That didn't work. Then they sent me to Kumbaya training. Oh, that was something. Lay down, the triangles in the corner, incest, teach you how to breathe. About 2 weeks of that shit. I said, I'm out of here. But I was still convinced something was wrong. Greenwich, Connecticut, I see a woman. She says, I think you got PTSD. I don't do that, but I have somebody that does. Okay. So I call this lady up, Dr. Ann, Darien, Connecticut, worked with 9/11 victims. We had about 20 some odd people die in that I-95 corridor, Greenwich, Stamford, Darien, Norwalk. Used to go to work down there. She says, okay, I'll see you. I never forget, it was my birthday, 7/17, 3:00 in the afternoon. So me and the lady I was dating at that time, we go down there at 3:00, give her all the stuff, blah, 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 blah. 5:00, she says to me, okay, Mr. Docimo. I said, Frank. She said, okay, Frank. She said, I'm going to tell you, here's the deal. I think you got severe PTSD, you have severe depression, and I don't want you to ever go back in a firehouse, not even to pick your gear up. She said, your career is over. So I said to her just like this. I said, well, that's kind of a shitty hand to be dealt. I said, all right, it is what it is, If I had a heart issue and I couldn't go back to work, I wouldn't go back to work. She's telling me I have a mental health issue. I can't go back to work. I'm not going back to work. I was 50 something at that, mid 50s. I said, okay. And the only reason they put me in as an inpatient because they were full. So I went every other day for 16 weeks just to try to get my head on a little bit. So that gets me, somewhere in the first of 2012. In between that, I know I'm going to lose my job. My dad passes away. And Dr. Ann said, oh my God, how much crap can you take? But she says, you know what, you're strong. You'll be okay. So once we get everything squared away, Dr. Ann, I told you I was doing that program in Houston about that. I can remember the title was You Know Me, but You Don't Really Know Me. I taught at that conference for 20 some odd years. First hot zone in the award. Did the first keynote for the first session. Always been there. Sponsored my brother who had passed away scholarship there. So I said to him, give me 15 minutes, main program. They said, on what? I'm not telling you. So I went in and said, everybody here knows me, but you don't know me. I took Dr. Ann's letter, first PowerPoint, said, Frank's done. Frank's done. So to go back on some of the things we talked about, great career, cutting edge on a lot of stuff, nationally recognized, locally recognized, all the awards that I could possibly want. Now I said, come take them back. When people say, well, you're very vocal. I said, what are you going to do? Come take my stuff back? Come take it back. I'm tired of packing it,
Mm.
And that was October. So it was a year from the heart issue till I said, this is the lane I need to be in.
Did the fire department you were with, did they acknowledge the toll that it took on you?
No, because we're in the middle of transition coming from Turtle River to the city. But, the city department was 300 or 400. And they had an EAP and some other things. But I just said, you know what? I've had not good luck with EAPs, not for me, but for others. When others were on incidents, and I called down, even when I'm all, when I'm not there anymore. Get EAP, get somebody help, get some intervention. I'm telling you, this is going to be a bad one. Just listen to me. They had, we've had guys that have high blood pressure. We had guys that had heart valve. We had guys that had lung cancer. They find a place. Do I need to stop? Can you
No,
hear?
You're good. You're good.
Okay.
That's
So-
your alarm system.
Yeah. Somebody's probably out front. So I said, they find a place. They ship you to fire marshal's office, deliver paperwork, whatever. But they decided, because Dr. Rand said, you're done, they could have found a place for me and they didn't.
So you had to go into you were in recovery, right? In a sense.
Yes.
And take us through that a little bit.
I bought the meds. That's one of the things. I bought the meds. I didn't want meds. And at some point, Dr. Ann said to me, we could do this the easy way or the hard way. She said, I'm going to tell you, I'll start you on low doses to try to help with this. And I said, all right. And it's unbelievable the amount of roots that come out of a mental health illness. What do I mean by that? I was bitten by a dog when I was 5 years old, pulled off a bike, ended up, taking some stitches. My entire life, I was afraid of dogs, absolutely afraid of them. I mean, like jumping up on top of tables so a dog wouldn't, even lick me. Well, after the meds, and by the interruption, my dogs are really important to me. And the dogs actually do as much for me as the medicine. That's one thing. The other one is I was pissed. That's really the bottom line. I worked for that city, whether it was Turner River, whatever, almost 40 years, never abused sick time. Chief Reed, I used to do a lot of stuff on my off time, and the chief would say, put a slip in for it. I go, okay. And I never would, because I would go do some training, or I'd go to training, and we used to have 15 days. We used to be allowed to go 15 days outside training. He goes, listen, nobody's using those days. You want an extra 10, extra 5, do whatever you want to do with them, But I was pissed. There's a black side to this that I don't want to say because I think it'll hurt some people, but there was a force to get me off the job. And just some of our talk. I'm a pretty bold, push forward, get out of my way kind of guy. And they saw an opening and they walked through it. They tried to retire me without me sending a retirement letter. And there was a chief at that time, super involved in the union, said this has never happened and it's never going to happen, period. They were processing my paperwork without my okay. When that ended, July 1st, I was out of a job. Good thing I had the time in. I had medical. That's part of our benefit. My wife, we had medical for her because we got married a day and a half before I retired, because the HR girl who knows all my cousins and uncles said, you're not married. I said, no. She says, Cheryl's never married. We're going to get married in the fall. She get married in the fall, she gets nothing. So my current wife never was married. She's on a job with FEMA on a Friday. I said, I'm retired next Wednesday. She says, okay. I said, we're getting married on Monday. She goes, what? I said, yeah. I said, we got to. We have to. Because it's the only, if we wait till the fall, you're going to get nothing, So we got married, got her mother up from Pennsylvania, got my mother up. We got married on a riverbed. One of my brothers was able to make it. But, it just, I don't know if I'll ever get over that piece. Because in my head, I'm going, I did a lot of stuff for that city. I was the LEPC co-chairman, for the chemical emergencies. I did training. I did stuff. League of Women Voters wanted somebody to speak on chemicals. The Household Hazardous Collection Day, I put our unit down there, just to say chemicals are the new, everybody said, oh, chemical emergency, just like the one out in California now. And one of my old trainees used to say, do you like the style of living? Do you like the medicine that makes you better? You like the food that's, pretty good as far as no buggies and all that? I said, plastics. I said, that's all chemicals. We're not going to do away with them. So we got to figure out, A, how to live with them, and B, how to deal with them in emergency. That incident in California, I was on a little web page. And like I said, you know me, I get involved in crap I probably shouldn't. But I said, the commander and the PIO on that incident are 100% correct. I trained 9 Morton chemical facilities that dealt with monomers and polymers. I said, once that thing starts to go, when it starts to polymerize, it's going to generate heat, which is going to cause a bigger reaction. So somebody said, oh, man, I had a lot of hits. Say, hey, man, that's good. You're helping us out. Blah, blah, blah. Somebody said, well, why don't they just go up there and put an inhibitor in it? So I posted the video where the guy puts the stomach medicine thing in the Coca-Cola, and it squirts up. You ever see that little deal? I said, okay, it's squirting up. Go put something in it to stop it. What? Well, they're going to do that. Well, they're going to go up to a tank that could explode. I had a facility in New Jersey, runaway reaction like that. It ripped 1 1/4-inch bolts holding the tank. There was 36 of them. It pulled 11 out of the floor. So, the resentment is the way I was treated. Can't change that.
They did you dirty. They did you wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. Not even a box of donuts.
I want to hit on something before we move forward, but you end up out in Wisconsin for a few years?
Yes. Wisconsin at that time had state-sponsored teams. They were done through a state legislation. They had 6 teams. And in my training company, I trained a lot of those teams as a contractor and did a lot of their conferences. So my buddy, who was the hazmat coordinator at that time, called me up. He goes, "Hey," he says, "I got promoted. There's going to be a hazmat job open." This was a year after I was forced into retirement. So I said, "Send me the stuff." He goes, "Seriously?" I go, "Hell yeah. I'm a young guy. I'll come out there. I'll do another 10 or 15 years and I'll get another pension." So long story short, I end up taking the job out there. First of all, my wife said to me, "I love you if I'm moving to a colder climate." And boy, I'll tell you what, it is cold out there. But it was a great job because they brought me in under state legislation. They went from 6 teams to 26 teams. And my job was to put all those teams on the same page. Well, I had a reputation out there. I had guys that quit hazmat teams, and when they found out I was coming back as a coordinator, rejoined. I had one guy say, "Finally, we got somebody here running this show that's a hazmat guy," you know? And it was a really great job. I had a lot of fun, made a bunch of changes, but couldn't deal with the boss. That was the bottom line. I went out there, I did my job, and, I call it jaywalking. They pick up little things. "Well, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you didn't do this." At one point, I said, "Listen, I'm an easy guy to get along with." I said, "It's simple. I'm rowing down the creek in a canoe. You got 2 choices. Get in the canoe and help, or get on the shore and get out of my way. I got things I have to do." So it was a great job, and I end up basically leaving. I just couldn't take all the goofiness.
And that was the end of the career.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
a sense, yeah.
Yeah. There was at that time it became survival mode.
hmm
You know,
And then you progress into what you have going on right now, and that's saving a life in reverse, which is something that I hope that a lot of people are listening to this show. They're going to get a lot of information from this, and I'll let you proceed and go ahead and tell us what it's about.
well, right after I told you I did my little gig in Houston, and in my head, sometimes little blurbs come in, beep, 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 come through, and it says, "We can't save anybody's life if we can't save ourselves." I said, "Damn." So I get online, boop, 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 and I find out saving a life in reverse is available. So I buy the website. When I do the first program in Houston, I had bands made. See, the thought behind saving a life in reverse is get help aligned before you need it. Because fire guys, cops, medics, we shut down. We encapsulate all that bad stuff. So my theory was, matter of fact, you would get a band, but you had to send me that you prove to me that you got somebody. So what do you mean? Get a priest. Get a priest to come to the Christmas dinner. Get a priest or professional help to come to the fire and ice, the cops and firemen hockey games, because the troops will get comfortable with them. That's going to help open the door. And if you're wearing the band in your fire department, everybody should know you're the guy that can make that happen. And, you start off with an idea and you try the best you can. It kind of faded because they had to do some work. But I sent Dr. Ann the PowerPoints to that. To this day, every time I go, once a year, go up, she says, "You're my biggest success." She said, I said, "Doc, all I did was take one subject, hazmat, train that for a bunch of years. I just changed the subject matter. That's all I did." So I try to learn. I tell people right up front, I'm not sure if I'm taking a bunch of stuff. I just got one of my first mental health certifications because I'm trying to do a better job. But all I'm saying is, if you're afraid to talk, call me. Call me. I don't care if it's 4:00 in the morning. I have 3 people right now, one of which I talk to almost weekly. Female paramedic. They're trying to get rid of her. She's got some issues, both real health and mental health issues. And I just say, listen, this is what I think. One of the things I found out doing the first class in Houston, all they want to do is talk. I really think that's the first door, is just have somebody listen to them. And then I'll say, you know what? Let's talk about this. You got a priest, you got a buddy, good buddy, somebody you can talk to. Maybe you should look at mental health, a professional. But let's start, or I'll say right up front, I think you need serious help. The other thing, this is the one that gets me pissed, really pissed. There is nobody, I believe, this is Frankie's head. There's nobody I believe that's going to commit suicide that nobody doesn't know. There's a sign, there's a symptom. I read a lot about that. One is a chief that typically his office is disarray, and Friday afternoon everything's in order, and he commits suicide on the way home. We have one like that in Connecticut. Cleaned his office up, decided the best way to get home was to walk on Metro North. Somebody knows, and that's why I'm so big on intervention. I would rather the person be pissed off that you intervened than dead. And the best way to remember this, I love the New York saying after 9/11. If you see something, say something. Somebody knows. They do. In the fire service, cops, but we are a family, and if one of us has got something going on, whether it's a divorce, guy goes, "Hey, I know you're getting divorced, kind of a little rough." Yeah. All right, if you need me, there's clues. And that's one of the things I try to teach people. One of the things I teach officers, the devil's in the darkness. If you have a fire guy and he stays up all night on the night shift, and he always says, "Oh, I don't sleep all at the firehouse. Oh, I'm a night guy." No, he's afraid to go to bed. That's the way we have to train the officers to fill that role of see something, say something. And that's where that started, was just try to get the word out.
So currently you're running Demosio and Associates, and you train government, military, and Fortune 500 companies. I think it's 39 states, 4 countries. How does saving a life in reverse incorporate into that?
Actually, COVID, my big key in my training was to deliver the programs on site, military, whoever. Well, if you can't get on site, I can't do training. So COVID basically put me out of business. I had Electric Boat, builds nuclear submarines. They were with me for 31 years. In the 31 years, I went through technical reviews, and I was beating training companies that were making $50 million a year. I used to say at conferences, there's 3 ways to get on the main program. Come from a big city. Everybody wants to hear the guy from New York, LA, Boston. Have a big incident. I'm sure somebody's going to be on the circuit for that California incident. Or the third way, the way I got there, is know what you're talking about. So the truth of the matter is, it was time for me to move away from the chemical and move into the mental health. I needed that. I needed to say, as the business was slowly dying, where do I put the effort? And I just pushed it right into Save My Life in Reverse. Call me anytime. Read my story. I'll tell you. Talk to me, whatever you need to do. I've been taking classes online to understand this issue a little better. And I think change of attitude, that's where it is. 20 years ago in the fire service, a good day in the fire on duty, you'd have bacon and eggs in the morning, you'd have hamburgers in the afternoon, and you'd have roast for dinner. It was a change of attitude that said, we have a medical health issue dealing directly related to the way we eat. So we have to change that. That's a change of attitude. We understand putting the gyms in the firehouses, doing the annual physicals, monitor our folks. Well, until we have a change of attitude in all the services, we're not going to change the mental health stigma. We're just not going to do it. So we need that change of attitude. And that's bottom up and top down. I really believe if somebody understood mental health issues, I wouldn't have been retired. They would have, listen, I'm a trainer. Put me in the training division, But I really believe, honestly, they didn't know how to deal with it. They just didn't know how to deal with it.
So if I would expect there's going to be firefighters, cops, and paramedics that are going to listen to the show. They're carrying a lot of weight, because you and I both know there's still a stigma in the first responder community, right? And even in the veteran community, that tough guy mentality or tough gal mentality, like, I can fight this, I can do this, I'm going to get through it. But you shouldn't do that. It's not good for your mental health. And so anybody that's listening to this, what does Frank have to say to them? If you're carrying something, you're carrying that baggage, you got to get rid of it. What do you say to those people?
I think inherent to the job we're going to see bad things. A friend of mine says, and I just used this the other day, and I did a little thing for the folks who did my heart valve. I said, you know what? First thing, you got to bring the A team. You got to be good at what you do. That's the first one. The other one is, if you think you could take these kind of hits and handle it yourself, you're just fooling yourself. You are. We have to get rid of the stigma. I feel bad for the cops because I started talking with some of my cop friends, and they say the first one they say they have a mental health issue, they take their gun, they take their badge. Well, maybe what we ought to do is figure out a few positions, cops, fire, medics, that if you get to that point where the brain says you can't do this anymore, find a place, put them in training, put them in records, put them doing something in the office. We get rid of a lot of good people because I really believe they just don't know what to do. They don't know what to do. The second one, I think, is don't be afraid to talk about it. This is not politically correct, but a cop friend said to me, Joe said, I can't do what you do. I said, what do you mean? He says, you talk about this all the time like it's nothing. Joe is a cop that owned an Irish bar we could walk from the fire station to. He knows every award. He knows my family. We used to eat there with the kids, all that kind of stuff. So Joe says to me one day, he goes, I can't do what you. I said, Joe, you got to find your laneway. He goes, well, he said, you're kind of like a homosexual. I said, what? He goes, yeah, think about it. 20 or 30 years ago, that group was in the closet. He said, you were in the mental health closet, but you're one of the few that walked out and said, I'm Frank Docimo. My career ended due to a mental health issue, and I'm here to help. So the other one, I think, day one in the training academies. Before you become a cop, before you become a firefighter, EMS, whatever, teach them what this job can do. Talk about the mental health issues. I really believe maybe there's some excellent employee groups. I've not had any good luck with them. That's why I say get a psychiatrist, get a priest, get somebody close that understands the way we work and the way we think. It's
was
different.
Just, I think it was yesterday or the day before, I saw a article, Police One magazine, implementing what you just talked about into law enforcement academies, right? So these are the things you're going to see, and this is what you need to do to unscrew yourself when these things happen. And we were never taught that.
Suck it up.
Suck it up. And more oftentimes than not, a lot of us, I mean, not all of us, but, you go to the watering hole, right? You go
Right.
after work, and that only numbs the pain. It's temporary.
Right. And that's one of the things I kind of fought them. Listen, I've never really drank. Case of beer lasts me an entire hockey season, but I thought pills weren't the answer, but I'll tell you what, it was the answer, so we got to address the issue day one. We need to make it easier if somebody actually has this medical issue and find a place, why are we kicking the bathwater out with the baby? Doesn't make sense. Just doesn't.
Well, what you're doing is a great resource, and it's out there, right? And people can reach out to you and ask, help me with this. I'm in a spot, and it doesn't matter, first responder or if it's somebody that's in the military or a veteran. So, and closing, is there anything else, any other message that you can send to the folks out there?
I think one of the things is don't be afraid to lean. Don't be afraid. You may have a brother on the job, a cousin on the job. Start there. But we have to educate. When somebody on my Saving a Life in Reverse shows a fireman going through a door with an axe, and the caption says, that's not the toughest door you're going to walk through. The toughest door you're going to walk through is go through and say, I think I have a mental health issue that needs some attention. Don't delay it. Don't delay it. I'm telling you, I lead such a good life now. I do. Does it come back every once in a while? Yeah. But I'll tell you what, I told Dr. Ann at one time, I said, I could go back to 4th grade and seeing some of the things that occurred that affected my mental health issues. And I say to her all the time, why didn't somebody pick this up? She said, because think about it. You're talking 40, 50, 60 years ago. Nobody connected those dots, you know? So, if you need help, get it. I mean, it's that simple. I don't care where you get it, but get it. And on the other side, if you think somebody needs help, say something.
Do you
Say
think,
something.
I'm sure there's going to be some people in the first responder administration field that's going to see this. Personally, and I know that there's some administrators out there, leadership, that need to pull their head out of their ass, and they need to be there for their people. And if somebody comes to them, it doesn't matter in the first responder community, in the military community or whatnot, don't be an ass to them. Don't threaten their job. Be there for them and support them and give them the resources and the help they need. Do you agree with that?
That hits the nail right on the head, because that female paramedic they're going after. And I said to her, well, we could stop that. She said, how? I said, it's easy. Get a lawyer to fire off a letter to say you're being discriminated because of sex and age. And I said, they'll leave you alone until you retire because it's cheaper to wait for you to retire than pay a lawsuit. The other thing, and you can get Saving a Life in Reverse off Facebook because the webpage is down. There's some issues. But here's my end of the bargain. I will go anywhere I'm invited for free. Cover my expenses. I'll meet with chiefs groups. I'll meet with recruiters. I'll meet with first responders, cops. I was the first firefighter in the state of Connecticut to teach at the Connecticut Police Academy because I treat everybody fairly. I don't care. Mental health doesn't care who you are.
No,
Mental health doesn't care how many awards you have.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm the lucky one. I was able to turn this boat around, and it really had to do with I just changed my subject matter.
Well, Frank, I can't appreciate you enough for coming on and sparing your time today. It's been a pleasure. What I will do in the description section, and we'll attach your Facebook information as and then any other social media platforms you're on, and a way for folks to get a hold of you and if they need assistance. But thanks for sharing your stories and taking the time to do this today. I certainly appreciate it.
I welcome any opportunity to get the word out. So thank you.
All right, Frank, it was good seeing you. Have a great day. Just stay on for a minute. Don't go anywhere.